All right, everyone. Welcome back. So, in the previous section, we talked about integrated pest management. In this section, we're going to get into the mowing and the mowing equipment. Um, I don't want to belabor it too much. I just want to try and go through some of the basics, from my walk of life, just my experience, both being in landscape business and also just reflecting back on, my experience, working with so many contractors over the years and tips and things that I've picked up, from the many walks of life I've been in. And in the previous section, we kind of stopped on the maintenance aspects of this. And so now let's get into the mowing equipment specifically and mowing specifically. And again, this isn't meant to be like an entire crash course of how to mow. It's just more really trying to give you guys an overview of some of the mowing, things that I've gleaned over the years, from being in this business. Using equipment that's appropriately sized for the job. So, you wouldn't necessarily go out and mow a, smaller residential property with a 60-inch zero turn or a multi-gang mowing unit. But at the same time, depending on what the mix of acreage is that you're mowing and maintaining is going to determine what size equipment is going to be appropriate. Because again, the smaller the deck, the more time it's going to take per acre to mow. So if we're doing a lot of larger properties, it's probably going to be necessary to focus on larger decks, 60-inch, 72-inch decks. So they do get the job done faster, but the quality isn't going to be as good. The bigger the deck, the more wobbly it can be. You can get more, what I would call like marginal scalping on the deck edges. You can also get areas in between where you have undulations in the turf where, you might get some, scalp zones depending on what height you're mowing at. You've got to watch for that because, again, the bigger the deck, the less control you're going to have over the quality of the cut overall. But, again, depending on the area that you're mowing, that may not necessarily be a big issue. Okay. So one tip that I've picked up from many guys over the years that really I think makes a difference in the aesthetics of a property is consider using the same or a similar deck size for both your trim mower and field mower. This can definitely, make a difference when you're dealing with like residential properties or like multi-unit housing properties, like condominium associations and things like that. These people tend to be very, very picky about how the lawn looks. So, one thing that you can do that really does have a small but meaningful, well, it's a small thing that you can do that has a large, meaningful impact on the property is using the same mower, same size deck on both your trim and your field mower. Sometimes a lot of guys, they only have one mower that they're using, especially if it's a walk behind type mower. I happen to have a 36-inch hydro walk behind that I mow my house with. But nonetheless, it can make a big difference, when you're using the same size mower on the aesthetics of that job. Use an appropriate mower for the grass type and use site. Okay, so rotary is usually going to be fine if you're mowing greens or tees or collars on a golf course. It's not going to be fine. Just likewise, if you're mowing, say, bent grass or Bermuda grass versus, another type of grass, you're definitely not going to want to mow it with a rotary type mower blade if you can help it. Most other sites are going to be fine. Even athletic fields are going to be fine. I could tell you that mowing like a high-end athletic field, whether it's a football field or a soccer field, if it's a high-profile field, getting out there and using a real type mower definitely is going to have, a nice visual impact, mainly in the form of striping. When we go through and we mow with a real mower, we can get a closer height of cut, which is going to improve the playability and the density of that turf. And the other thing it's going to do is it's going to lay that grass a certain way so we can actually create that striping pattern that many people love to see on athletic fields. We also see it's on places like Jacobs Field, where the Cleveland Indians play again, keeping that at a low height of cut, keeping that field top dressed so we can keep it at a low height of cut. And then also, like I said, we're grooming that grass and laying out a really nice striping pattern on that turf. We can actually accomplish the same thing with rotary mowers. A lot of times you can either have or get striping kits that go on the back of the top, basically striping rollers that will lay that grass. We can actually also use an empty lawn roller to achieve the same effect. So again, you're basically, the idea is you roll it in the same direction between your yard marks. So every stripe, every goal, or every path that you have on that, or every in between your yard hash marks, depending on how you lay that field out, you can actually roll it in the same direction and then go back, and alternate opposite direction back and forth on that field or on that turf to achieve the same thing. But again, on your rotary mowers, you might have the ability of putting a striping kit in on that. So that's just something, again, to keep in mind, and something that can be beneficial for you if you're trying to achieve that higher quality look. Mowing at the appropriate speed. One of the number one complaints that I hear passed on to me from HOAs or from, clients with various properties is that they feel like the mowing crews are mowing too fast. It's interesting. I was just looking at a Hustler, mower website, and, their top of the line mower says you can mow at 16 miles per hour. I can honestly tell you, I don't know one person in their right mind that would go out and mow at 16 miles per hour. I would really question how good that looks. Just because you can do it doesn't mean that you want to, okay? So you want to make sure that you're mowing at the appropriate speed. If your mower is going so fast that you're popping wheelies out there, you're going to do two things. You're going to damage the turf, and you're probably going to hurt yourself, okay? So mow at 4 to 5 miles per hour. It's also the same speed that we a lot of times will fertilize at. I think you might be able to get away with 6 miles per hour in some situations, but realistically, if you really want to have an optimal cut on that turf, I don't see how you're going to be able to really go much past 4 to 5 miles per hour. Okay, another thing that we want to watch, especially when we're using hydrostatic equipment, is that you're going to want to watch your turns. You may want to use a wider swing radius or a 3-point turn, because if you try and turn on a dime when you're doing your return passes, you can often leave a burn mark or peel the turf if it's poorly rooted in that situation. That's another common complaint that I've heard from guys. Again, it kind of relates back to that mowing too fast and not taking the time to slow down on those passes and those turns, or give yourself enough room to turn before you come back into it. Again, it goes back to the aesthetics. It also goes back to, you're causing stress and harm to that turf, by turning too quickly on that turf. Okay. So another component of mowing is you want to make sure that you have your engine RPMs at enough. Okay, you want to run those RPMs enough to deliver between 18,000 and 19,000 RPMs at the blade tip to achieve that best lift and discharge. So it's kind of a magic number with mowers. So if you're between 18 and 19,000 RPMs, that would be revolutions per minute at that blade tip, then you're going to get good lift. You're going to get good discharge. If you go too slow, you're going to have problems. If you go too fast, you're going to have problems, okay? So it's kind of this optimal thing on the commercial mowers, especially, that you want to be between 18,000 and 19,000 RPMs to achieve that best lift and discharge, okay? So you want to mow at the appropriate height. So 3 to 4 inches is great, but a number of the newer varieties can actually take a lower height of cut. And another little key tidbit that I learned recently that I want to pass on, I've said it a couple times before, um, is that turf type tall fescue will actually look better. The lawn, the aesthetics will be better if it's mowed at 2 inches versus 3 to 4 inches. It's not that you can't mow it at 3 to 4 inches. In fact, it's going to be quite happy being mowed at 3 to 4 inches. But one of the things that happens when we mow tall fescue at a higher height of cut is it tends to revert. And what I mean by that is you end up getting a wider blade texture, wider blade thickness on that tall fescue. If we start dropping that height of cut down to say 2 inches, it will start to tighten that up. It'll also improve the density. So, I've said this at my own house that when I originally grew my lawn in the first couple of years, just to minimize the amount of stress and give it a chance to really get anchored in well, I was mowing it at a higher height of cut, like 4 inches. It was very long, very shaggy compared to like my neighbor's yard who likes to scalp it. I'm sure he was thrilled with me. Oftentimes he would actually start mowing into my yard, I think, because he was, upset by the fact that, it was so much higher, but I was doing that intentionally. Last year I actually did lower my deck on my mower and I dropped that height of cut down to where it was more in probably like a 2.5 inch range. I may drop it down again even lower this year. I haven't decided yet, but I can tell you that doing so, it definitely improved the density. It made that canopy density much thicker. It promoted tillering. It promoted rhizome growth in the tall fescue. It also reverted those blades back to a finer texture, which is more what we're looking for in a turf type tall fescue. But again, many of these grasses, especially with many of these improved varieties that we're seeing out there, we can get away with lower heights of cut. And, the old rule of thumb is that everybody was mowing too short, but just to let you know, that may not necessarily be the case. If we know what the grass is that we're working with, or we know what the specific variety is that we're working with, it may actually tolerate lower heights of cut. So when it comes to mowing in general, the rule of thumb is never mow more than a third of the height at a time. Okay. So, you may say, well, what about the springtime when the grass is growing like crazy? Well, there's two things if we can do it that we want to try to do or should try to do. One would be we either mow more frequently to maintain that desired height, say 2 or 3 or 4 inches. Either we mow more frequently, or we raise the height of cut on the deck. We raise that deck height and raise the blade height to compensate. So, as we're moving into that peak growth period, usually in late April going into May, maybe we start to bring that deck height up incrementally to kind of pair it with the grass growth. And then we can start, conversely lowering that deck of cut height of cut as we move into that June time frame. Once the grass starts slowing back down, we can start dropping it down again. So that's a practice that we can use. And many times on riding mowers especially, we have the ability to really easily and quickly change the deck height. I don't know why you would spend $10 or more thousand dollars on a piece of equipment that has the ability to do this and then not use it. I will tell you that I hardly know anybody that actually bothers. Even the biggest complain to me about mowing and grass clipping removal and all of this stuff. If you ever think about having your crust the height on the mowing deck, and they just won't do it. I don't what the issue is. It's just like, I don't know. It's there. If I had a mower that did this, I would gladly use it all the time. I would be playing with it every week. Maybe that's just the type of person and play around with things and experiment. But My mower is a fixed deck 36-inch hydro walk behind. It's a pain in the butt. I got to unbolt the wheel motor, brackets and lower all of that down. I mean, it's just a real pain in the butt. So just keep that in mind. A lot of mowers, depending on what you have, may have the ability to pretty easily change that height of cut if necessary. Again, like I was saying a moment ago, rigid deck mowers like the one that I have, which would be a lot of your walk behind mowers, they can still be adjusted. It's a little more cumbersome. Again, my mower looks somewhat similar to this. It's a little bit nicer, but nonetheless, you can see where you have these bolts here on the side of the tires. Those are where your motor mounts are on the engine deck frame assembly on that mower, and they actually can be unbolted, and those units can be moved up and down. There's usually sets of holes on the side of the deck where you can adjust that. You usually also have spacers on your blade spindles. That would usually be on the underside of the blade. I wouldn't recommend using those necessarily to adjust the height so much. You do want to keep that blade at a certain distance away from the top and the bottom of the deck for it to work effectively. I usually like to keep the blades right in the middle between the bottom edge and the top ceiling of the deck. I don't really use the blade spindles to play with the height that much, or the washers, spacers on the spindles to play with that height too much. You also have spacers again on your front caster assemblies. Again, you don't want to play with the height too much on that, because one of the big things that you want to make sure that you have with any mower is you want to have a good seal between the bottom edge of that deck and the grass as it's cutting. So if you have too much camber or angle to your mowing deck, it can cause a couple of issues. One, you're not going to get a good even height of cut. You're also not going to get a good seal, and you're going to get a lot of skips and misses and things like that. You really need a good seal to kind of form that vacuum where it's actually pulling that grass up to the blade and then cutting the grass off. So, again, we adjust the main way that we're going to adjust the height is with these rear drive tire assemblies. Dropping those into the next set of bowl holes, and then adjusting your spacers accordingly to make sure that deck is pretty much level, so that we can maintain that seal. Another practice that I really want to talk about, if you guys can do this, I see this mistake made over and over again, especially with a lot of the larger commercial maintenance firms, is you want to change your mowing pattern. So changing mowing pattern, at least staggering your passes from week to week. It's going to prevent training of the turf to grow a certain way, which is going to result in poor aesthetics. Basically, if you keep mowing the same direction, it's going to start training that grass to grow a certain direction. And so you'll go through and you'll think you mowed it. And then next thing you know, a day or two later, that grass stands back up and you're like, man, it doesn't look like I mowed at all. And that's one of the problems that can happen. The other thing that can happen is we can get soil rutting. So when you keep running those wheels on the same track over and over and over again, we're going to create ruts, low spots, basically. And you can kind of see this pattern here where you start getting these ruts forming. It also, alternating your mowing pattern weekly, it's going to reduce compaction in those areas. So you can actually start seeing this kind of a pattern develop too, where that soil becomes compacted to the point that it actually causes a reduction in the density and the vigor of the turf in those wheel ruts, those wheel marks. So, again, you're going to see this. The other thing that can happen too is as these areas kind of sink lower, another common thing that I see is you start seeing scalping develop, because what happens is you have this low dip that the wheel goes into, and then this high, brow, and then your dip again. And so if you can imagine, your mower blade ends up actually being lower than maybe the height of cut that you set it at. So instead of it being at say 3.5 inches, maybe it's at 2.5 inches or so. You get the idea. But you can actually end up starting to get scalping in between the wheel marks because of the compaction and the lowering of the soil in those wheel ruts. Another practice that we can try and employ is try mulching your clippings if you can, to reduce waste and recycle nutrients. So this would be another kind of fits a little bit into the maintenance side on the IPM strategies. You're probably not going to completely avoid bagging, especially in the spring and fall. But there may be other times of the year where you can save time and money and actually improve the ecosystem by recycling those clippings. We don't want to necessarily do this all the time because this can contribute to thatch. Okay, so it's like everything in moderation. Too much of a good thing isn't a good thing anymore. And if we're constantly mulching properties, again, a lot of times what will end up happening is we'll start to develop a really bad thatch layer. So there are going to be times where, again, like when you have that peak growth, especially where you probably are going to want to consider removing the clippings just so you're not contributing to excessive thatch buildup. Again, this is a real common problem when we recycle clippings on lawns. And this is going to create a lot of other maintenance and IPM related issues on the backside where, instead of having a normal, healthy soil profile, we start getting these thatch layers, which are going to make it more difficult to maintain the turf. A lot of your chemistries are going to get caught up in this thatch layer. The grass is going to be prone to rooting into this versus rooting into the soil just because it's easier, which means that it's not going to do as well when we have periods of heat and drought. You're creating a perfect environment to harbor insect pests and disease pathogens in this thatch. And it's very spongy, which again, if you can imagine mowing on this, the mower tires are definitely going to be sinking in. It's definitely going to enhance the likelihood of scalping, when we start getting these excessive thatch layers built up. So definitely something that we want to make sure that we're not causing. Okay. So most mowers do have mulch kits available that contain blades and baffles and cover plates and things like that. Mulching is going to be a different practice than just your side discharge. Okay. So I just have a side discharge on my mower. There isn't a mulch kit available for it. What I've actually done on my mower is I have gator blades and then I actually go over and double cut. The double cutting does help to kind of chop up those clippings a little bit finer. That way, again, they break down a little bit easier and we're not contributing to that thatch. So again, we want to consider that mulching and side discharge here are two different things. And if we do want to mulch, we probably do want to set our equipment up, or we definitely do want to set up our equipment with mulching blades and mulching kits so that we can do that properly. Okay, so some mowers, this would be a John Deere one, but this is something that I'm seeing more and more of. They call this a mulch on demand feature. So you actually have the ability, depending on the time of year, to set your mulching to either 100% or 0%. And there's settings in between where you can actually determine the percentage of mulching versus, say, bagging or discharge that you have on that mower. And that's kind of a cool feature. I would love to have a mower like that because, again, like I said, there might be times of the year where I could get away with 100% mulching, like over the summertime or early in the spring or later in the fall. But there's other times where I may want to have 100%, grass collection and removal. Like maybe if I'm using it to help with fall cleanup a little bit, or if I'm, using it in the spring and fall during those peak growth periods. So, Another component that we should always look at and consider on a mower are the mower blades themselves. So there's a lot of different types and styles, but when it gets to the blade itself, we want to make sure that we're using a hardened steel blade. I recommend what are called Marbane blades. So these are going to be a boron ally steel blade. They have a higher boron content, which makes it a lot harder blade. Basically means that it's going to maintain that cutting edge a lot better. And if you hit an obstacle, it's going to be a lot more resistant. You're gonna reduce the amount of damage potentially to that blade. So some blades, like certain gator blades, actually come with a carbide reinforced tip to help maintain that blade edge longer. Okay, it's not going to eliminate the need to sharpen the blades, but it just may help maintain that cutting edge a little bit longer and buy you some time. Okay, so I wouldn't recommend constantly using gator blades year round. They tend to beat up the grass pretty good. They are good, in your spring and fall when you have that really, really heavy growth period where you got a lot of grass and you're trying to mow and ingest a lot of grass in that mowing deck. So they do really help with that to help cut that material up and make it easier to discharge and bag. They also can help in the fall if you're getting into a little bit of light fall cleanup with all your leaves and other debris on that lawn. Those gator blades, again, are really nice to kind of help mulch that up and break it up and reduce the bulk. It increases the bulk density of that waste, so you don't maybe have to dump your bags and haul away as much. It's not going to take up as much room. So, on your mowing deck as well, I will tell you, mine is a 36-inch. It's got two 18-inch blades. I will tell you that 3 blades are better than 2 on a rotary deck. They keep up better with high growth situation. They minimize skips and areas where you miss. I have to do a lot of second cuts on mine with the 36-inch mower. It just isn't ideal for mowing, the field. They're great for trimming in, but they're really not great for mowing that field. So I don't recommend it. If you can, you always want to try and mow with at least 3 blades. I feel like the 3 blades are just going to do a much better job of managing the material and maintaining that height of cut, or maintaining that quality of cut, through that mowing process. So again, I've said it before, you want to sharpen these blades frequently. You want to properly maintain the blades. That way you can have the greatest impact on how the lawn looks, even more than watering or fertilizing, okay? So mowing probably is going to have the greatest overall impact on how that lawn looks. It's unfortunate because a lot of other guys downstream get blamed when it's probably the mower's fault that the lawn looks so bad. So, and the reason is because some grasses like tall fescue and perennial rye are prone to shredding when they get cut. They might have real thick vascular walls and real thick cell wall structure in general, and they might be prone to tearing and tattering when they're cut. So if you're not maintaining these with a sharp blade, a couple days later, if you come back and look at that property, it's going to have this real hazy or frosty appearance. Like it just, doesn't look right. And the customer ends up being really frustrated because that grass doesn't look as good as it is. A lot of times they end up blaming the fertilizing company or somebody else, saying it's their fault, when in fact, the mowing is really what's contributing to the problem. So, again, poorly cut turf, turf that's cut with dull blades is going to develop this kind of hazy appearance and look unhealthy, and again, real easy to diagnose, but a lot of times it's misdiagnosed, and the wrong service or the wrong aspect of lawn maintenance is being blamed for this. So when we mow these blades, we want to mow them at a 40 to 45 degree angle. You also want to use a blade balancer to ensure that blade is evenly balanced. You don't want to remove too much material on one side and not enough on another. There's two blade edges on the mowing blade, so you want to make sure that that blade is balanced and you're removing an equal amount when you grind those. You're going to want to remove an equal amount of material off both sides. Otherwise, that blade is going to be off balance. It's going to cause a lot of wear and tear on that spindle assembly. And it's also going to throw, again, that balance off. So you may cut into your RPMs. You may damage your spindles over time by causing excessive wear on them. So we want to make sure that those blades are sharpened properly and balanced properly. Another little trick that I picked up years ago, I used to, besides selling fertilizer and stuff, I also used to sell equipment. I used to sell mowing equipment. I used to maintain mowing equipment at my Lesko branch up in Avon, Ohio. So we had a pretty large service and repair center. So I learned a lot. Three of the Lesko facilities that I worked in happened to be three of the largest ones in the country at the time, and they also all had service and repair facilities on site. So I was able to pick up a lot on the equipment maintenance and servicing side. One of these little tidbits that I picked up is, when you get done putting that nice 45-degree angle and giving that blade a nice sharp edge, to give it a little bit additional strength, instead of leaving that edge perfectly sharp like you may want to with a knife, I actually learned that you can actually run that blade edge through and just square it off a little bit when you get done sharpening it. Just give it a little bit of that squared edge on the end of that blade. A perfectly sharpened blade's going to give you a beautiful cut. The problem is it's not going to maintain that very long at all, and it'll actually dull faster. So that blade edge, just like on a knife or anything, the weakest point of the blade is going to be that edge. So the sharper and the thinner that blade edge is, the faster it's going to wear. That's why we have to continually sharpen it. But again, another thing that we can use, another little tip that we can use to help maintain that blade a little longer is, once we're done sharpening it, square off that edge a little bit. It's still going to give you a really good height of cut, really good quality of cut, nice clean cut, but that blade isn't going to wear out quite as quickly. So another rule of thumb, generally we want to sharpen blades every 20 to 25 hours of mowing. So if time is an issue, then, you're going to want to keep additional sets on hand. So when you have a rainy day or a day that you're back working at the shop, that's a good day to maybe have one of the guys stick behind and just run the blades through the blade grinder and make sure that you have a good bank of sharpened blades. So if you can't sharpen the blades, if you can't take them off the mower if you can't take them off the mower every 20 to 25 hours, at least be able to swap them out with another spare set of blades that you already have sharpened. Okay. Check that the mower deck is level on a concrete surface. If the deck's not level, this is going to is going to cause some problems. It's going to, prevent you from having a good seal when you're cutting. It's also going to make sure that your height of cut from side to side is even. You may want to check and make sure at that time that your tire pressure is properly adjusted. One of the ways that we can kind of fine tune that deck height, make sure that it is uniform from one side to the other, is, by adjusting the tire pressure, inflating and deflating to make sure that we have that, good, even cut on both sides of the deck. So when we get into mower maintenance, again, I'm just going to try and fly over some generalities when it comes to the mowing maintenance. We've hit on the mowing blades pretty good on the maintenance aspects of that. Another thing that we also want to do, and we want to make sure that this is done regularly, is we want to make sure that that deck is regularly cleaned and scraped. Okay, because if we allow that buildup under that deck over time, it's going to affect the quality of the cut and the performance of the mower. So it's going to end up making it take longer, and we're not going to get as good of a cut. We're not going to get as good a discharge out of that deck. So, it's just going to cause problems down the road. I firmly believe that these hose end attachments are useless or absolutely useless. I mean, they really aren't going to do much of anything. If you're going to be down there changing the blades out anyways, get out that putty knife and just start scraping, okay? You could buy a deck scraping tool, but honestly, if you have an old putty knife is going to work just as well. Just get under there and scrape the bottom of that deck off, okay? Um, so while you're doing that, while you're doing it, you might as well get in there and pull the pulley covers off the off that mowing deck and make sure that all the dust and debris and everything is cleaned off, blown off. You can even hose it off really good under there. Or power wash it off. Just make sure everything is good and clean because again, that dirt and grime around those pulleys and those spindles is going to cause premature wear on your belts, on your pulleys, and on your spindle assemblies. Okay, those are all spinning at pretty high RPM. So imagine if you get a little bit of dirt and dust in there, what's going to happen. Plus, if you get a buildup of grass under there, all that heat and friction that's being created, you could start a small brush fire underneath that. So do make sure that that is cleaned out underneath those pulley covers. Another area that we don't always think about is, the engine and the engine shroud. For all intents and purposes, these engines are usually air cooled. I don't see too many liquid cooled engines out there. Most of them are air cooled, which means they have cooling fins. If you see these fins on the outside of the cylinders, those are actually there for heat displacement. Okay, so if you can see, I don't know if you see it well in this picture, but you can see, they remove the engine shroud, which is the plastic cover off the top of the engine and the flywheel, and you can see that this is literally caked up with dirt and grass bits and all sorts of bits and pieces and debris, and it's literally caked in there. If we're not keeping that clean and we're not allowing good airflow down and over those cylinder heads, what's going to end up happening is we're going to cause overheating. We're going to cause faster breakdown of the oil and the fluids on that engine, and we're going to cause premature engine failure. So definitely want to keep that cleaned out periodically. You want to change your engine oil at recommended intervals. You may want to change it even more frequently in hotter weather because the combination of that warm weather with the high temperatures on that engine, again, we're going to be breaking down that engine oil. So we may want to consider changing that oil more frequently in the summer months. It goes without saying, but we're going to say it anyways. We want to make sure that we check and clean the air filters regularly and replace them when necessary. The more that these things get clogged up, the more the more that we're going to increase fuel use. I'm sorry. So we definitely want to make sure that we're keeping these air cleaners cleaned regularly. Usually they're come in two pieces. You're usually on this style filter, you're going to have a foam pre-filter around the outside to catch a lot of the larger debris. And those can be cleaned off really easily. And then again, we want to check those inner fins. Sometimes we have two-stage air cleaners, which you'll have an outer and an inner filter, to clean that. Again, we just want to make sure that they're cleaned regularly and replaced when necessary. That way we're not running those too rich and burning through too much fuel and fouling up the spark plugs and everything else. So we want to make sure the tires are properly inflated. They do usually have a guideline on what PSI to keep them at. We don't want them underinflated and we don't want them overinflated because again, that's going to cause premature wear and tear on those tires. We want to consider, maybe using propane instead of gasoline. Now, I've seen more and more of this, again, especially with some of the larger companies that are trying to go more of the route of sustainability. Propane is a cleaner fuel than gasoline. It's also a lot easier on the engines. The key to remember with propane is I do not recommend going with a conversion kit oftentimes if you're using a conventional gasoline engine. if you convert that engine over, and there's some aftermarket propane conversion kits, carburetor kits out there. The problem is that you will end up voiding the manufacturer's warranty on that engine. So if you are going to go the route of propane, if that's something that you want to consider, you're going to want to buy the mower that way to begin with. Okay, so you want to make sure that that actually is using an engine that actually comes with a manufacturer installed propane carburetor assembly on it. If you don't, you're going to run the risk of damaging the engine and voiding the warranty. Okay, so we're going to wrap it up here. The next segment that we're going to move into is the aeration component. And so we're going to break it off here. And again, like I always say, if you guys have any comments or questions, be sure to reach out to me. And this will conclude this portion of the module.